I spent 60 years being angry at my father. 60 years! And I'll tell you something that took me until I was 81 years old to understand. I was angry at the wrong man. My name is Leroy. I'm 81 years old. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, in 1944. And I need to tell you something today that I wish someone had told me when I was 25, when I was 30, when I was 45, and still carrying a wound that I didn't even know the shape of. Because I see you. I see the way some of you look at your fathers, the distance, the silence at the dinner table, the phone calls you don't make, the visits you keep putting off. And I'm here to tell you, from the other side of 80 years of living, that you may not understand what you're looking at. I didn't. I thought I knew my father. I thought I had him figured out by the time I was 17 years old. Augustus James Washington, 6 feet tall, quiet man. A man who went to work every morning at 4:45 a.m. and came home at 6 p.m. and sat in his chair and didn't say much of anything to anybody. A man who never once, not once in my entire childhood, told me that he loved me. A man with a jaw set like stone and eyes that looked right through you. I thought he was cold. I thought he didn't care. I thought there was something wrong with him. Lord knows it took me 81 years to understand there was something wrong with the world he lived in. Before I go any further, if this is already hitting somewhere you didn't expect, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, because what's coming next is the kind of thing nobody talks about. In the kind of truth that lives between generations, quiet and heavy, until somebody is brave enough to say it out loud. I'm going to take you back to Birmingham in 1952. I was 8 years old. My father worked at the Sloss Furnaces. If you know anything about Birmingham, you know what that means. Steel work, hard work, the kind of work that takes something from a man every single day and doesn't give it back. He worked the floor, he loaded, he poured. He sweated through Alabama summers that could reach 110 degrees inside those walls, and every single day he worked alongside white men who were paid more than him, not a little more, a lot more, for the same work, for harder work, sometimes, because my father was one of the best workers on that floor, and everybody knew it, including the foreman, a man named Gerald Briggs, who would call my father boy well into my father's 40s, boy, 42 years old, a man with 3 children, a man who had never been late to work a single day in his life. And Gerald Briggs would look him in the eye and say, "Get over here, boy." I know this because my father told me once, only once. I was 14, and I had gotten into a fight at school with a white boy who had called me a name. I came home furious, and for some reason, I still don't know why, my father talked that night. He sat at the kitchen table after dinner, and he talked. He told me about Gerald Briggs. He told me about the time in 1948 when he had tried to apply for a supervisor position, a position he was more than qualified for, and the plant manager had laughed at him, not smiled, not declined politely, laughed. And then my father looked at me across that kitchen table and said something I didn't understand until I was 81 years old. He said, "Leroy, a man who shows them how he feels is a man they can break. You hear me?" I heard the words. I did not understand what they cost him to live by. Here's what I thought for most of my life. I thought my father was distant because he didn't care enough to be present. I thought he was silent because he had nothing to say. I thought he was hard on me. Lord, was he hard on me, because something in him was broken. When I was 19, I left Birmingham for Detroit. The Great Migration had already pulled half our community north, and I followed. I got a job at Ford. I got an apartment. I sent money home when I could, and I told myself I was going to be different from my father. I was going to be warm. I was going to be present. I was going to tell my children every day that I loved them. I had my son, Theodore, in 1967, and for a few years I kept that promise to myself. I was there. I was present. But Detroit in the late 60s was on fire. Not just literally, though Lord knows it was that too in the summer of '67, when I stood on my apartment balcony and watched the smoke rise over the city. It was on fire in ways that get inside a man. The work was hard, and the hours were long, and the foreman at Ford. His name was different, but he was the same man as Gerald Briggs. Different city, same story. You work twice as hard to get half as far. And then somebody tells you to smile about it, and slowly, so slowly I didn't notice it happening, I started to become my father. And I started coming home tired in a way that had nothing to do with my body. I started sitting in my chair. I started going quiet at the dinner table. I started saying things to Theodore like, and God forgive me for this, toughen up. The world ain't going to be easy on you. I was trying to prepare him. I thought I was loving him the only way I knew how to love, the way my father had loved me. I didn't realize I was repeating a wound. Now, if you're still listening, and what I'm saying is touching something in you, subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories here, more truths that cost something to tell, more of what I should have said to Theodore 30 years ago, but am saying to you today instead. Don't let this be the only thing you hear from me. I want to tell you about the day my father died, October 14th, 1987. I was 43 years old. I drove back to Birmingham. My mother called me at 6 in the morning and said, "Your father is gone. He died of a heart attack. He was 68 years old. He had worked at Sloss Furnaces for 31 years and retired with a handshake and a small pension that barely covered his bills. He had spent 31 years building something that was never going to be his." I stood at his grave on a gray October morning, and I felt, I'm ashamed to tell you this, relief, not grief, relief, because I had spent my whole life waiting for something from that man that he never gave me. And when he died, I thought the waiting was finally over. I was wrong. The waiting doesn't end when the person dies. That's the cruelest part of this thing. The waiting just turns into something else. And it turns into a question that follows you around for the rest of your life. Why? Why were you like that? What happened to you? What did they take from you that you didn't know how to get back? I carried that question for 30 years before I found anything close to an answer. The answer came from my granddaughter, Simone. She's 26 now, smart girl, studies history at a university in Ohio. A few years ago, she came to visit me, and she brought some books. She sat with me at this table right here, and she showed me things about the history of Birmingham, about steelwork and unions and redlining and what systematic exclusion does to a person over decades. And she said, "Grandpa, your father wasn't cold. He was protecting himself. He was protecting you." I had to sit with that for a long time, because I had spent 6 decades believing my father didn't love me enough to show it. And the truth, the real truth, was that my father loved me so much he tried to armor me the only way he knew how, with silence, with hardness, with a jaw set like stone, so nobody could see how scared he was for his children in a world that had already shown him exactly what it thought of them. He was not a cold man. He was a man who had been given no room to be warm. I want to talk to you now, directly. How many of you are carrying anger towards someone in your family right now? A father, a mother, a grandparent who seemed distant or hard or absent. You think you know them. You think you've figured them out. Let me ask you something. Do you know what happened to them before you arrived? Do you know what the world did to them? What was said to them? What was denied to them? What was taken from them before you were even born? Do you know what they were carrying when they looked at you and didn't know how to say what they needed to say? Because I'll tell you what I know now, at 81, that I did not know at 17 or at 40 or even at 60. A person's hardness is almost never about you, almost never. My father's silence was not my sentence, it was his survival. And when I finally understood that, when Simone sat across from me at this table and showed me what I had been too close to see, I did something I had never done in my life. I wept for my father, not for myself, for him, for the man who went to work every morning at 4:45 and came home with something taken out of him that he could never put back, for the man who set his jaw so his children wouldn't see him break, for the man who said, a man who shows them how he feels is a man they can break, and had lived by that rule so long that in the end he couldn't take it off, even with his own son. I wept for Augustus James Washington, and then I picked up the phone and I called Theodore, my son, who I had done the same thing to. 40 years of the same silence, the same hardness, the same wound passed down like a name. And I said to him, I was 78 years old when I said this, God help me. I said, Theodore, I owe you an apology, and I owe you an explanation, and I don't have as much time left as I used to, so let me talk. Here is what I want to leave with you today. The anger you carry toward someone who hurt you may be real. I'm not here to take that from you. The wound is real. The absence is real. The things that weren't said and should have been, those are real. But before you close the door on someone, before you decide you've figured out who they are and what they meant by the way they treated you, ask one more question. What happened to them? What did the world do to them before they got to you? Because I am telling you, from 81 years of living, that most of the hardness you see in the people who raised you is not cruelty. It is scar tissue. It is the shape that a person takes when they have been pressed too hard for too long in a world that did not make room for them to be soft. My father was not given permission to be soft, not by Gerald Briggs, not by the plant manager who laughed at him, not by a system that told him every single day that his feelings were a liability. And so he passed to me the only thing he had, his armor, and I, God help me, I passed it to Theodore. The armor worked. We survived. My father survived. I survived. Theodore survived. But there is a difference between surviving and living. And it took me until 81 years old to understand that. The chains that hold your family in silence, they are older than any one person. They were forged before you were born, and they will be passed down to your children and your children's children unless somebody, somewhere, in some generation, decides to look at them clearly and say, not me, not in my hands, this ends here. I called Theodore because I still could. He's 57 years old, and he still picks up when I call. Don't wait until you're 78. Don't wait until you're standing at a grave in October asking a question that can never be answered. The door is still open. Somewhere in your life, right now, there is a door that is still open. A phone you could pick up, a conversation you could have, a question you could ask, a truth you could finally tell. Ask it. Make the call. Have the conversation before your time runs out, before theirs does. Because I can tell you from this side of 81 years, the conversations you don't have are the ones that never leave you. They stay. They stay in the chair by the window. They stay in the silence at the kitchen table. They stay in the jaw set like stone that you inherited without knowing and passed on without meaning to. Don't let this be your story. My father's name was Augustus James Washington, and he worked 31 years at Sloss Furnaces in Birmingham, Alabama. He never once told me he loved me, and he loved me more than I knew how to see. I understand that now. I just wish I'd understood it while he was still here to hear me say so. This channel exists because I refuse to let these truths disappear. If this reached you today, if something in what I said touched something you've been carrying, subscribe, stay, because everything I have left to say, I'm going to say here, while I still can, before my time runs out.